My name is Mark Moffett. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering for our public sector business. And so you guys here at University of Montana are a great customer, and we certainly appreciate your business. And Kurt, team, thank you from CompuNet for making this possible today. So when we look at the Internet of Things, Jim did a fantastic job of introducing a lot of different sensors and a lot of capabilities that are out there. What I really wanted to do is try to narrow the scope a bit. I'll cover a little bit of the same content, maybe use a few different use cases, if you will, but then in the second half, drop it down a little bit deeper into what we're doing specifically around what I call connected communities. You may hear it referred to as smart and connected. We've learned from a lot of customers that they hate the smart word. It's more about how do you connect the community as a whole and get everybody really aligned to what a community is all about, and that's better citizen services. So if you look at the Internet of Things, it is, to Jim's point, a lot of different sensors out there, a lot of things, but let me talk a little bit about what it's not. So when you think about the Internet of Things, typically I think people talk about, Jim mentioned the number of devices that are going to be connected. It's not just simply about connecting a bunch of things. It's not inherently secure. So when you think about the traditional role of IT, not that everything that we roll out is secure, but security is typically top of mind. But as you see Internet of Things deployments, what you find is people sticking Echo Dots on your network, Alexa, hooking up thermostats, all those type things. And just keep in mind, every one of those devices up to this point, there's no regulated approach to the way that those are secured. So essentially what happens is every time somebody connects one of those, you've introduced another little bitty Linux platform onto your network that gives somebody the opportunity to get in and potentially do bad things. So your attack surface, as we call it, our attack vector, increases exponentially. It's also not transformational in and of itself. Jim did a really good job of talking about how the Internet of Things and these sensors are connected. You start unifying the data, but when you start thinking about things as he brought up, blockchain, fog computing, when you start bringing these all together with the power of data, you start to really realize that there are really the sky's the limit, so to speak, on the number of use cases that you can think of as you bring this together. So when you think about the context, here we go. So fully connected, why is Cisco so interested in this space? First of all, what do we do as well as anybody? That's connect stuff, right? Regardless of what it is, wired, wireless. We are in the business of making sure that you've got rock solid connectivity for all of your devices. The next thing is when you think about data, again in the context of where we've typically thought about data, it's in the realm of more of the data center, what we capture through our applications. But what's now become available is an immense amount of telemetry data from the network itself. The ability to couple that with what you're seeing from data center to WAN edge all the way out to the consumer. And then really the ability to look at that in a uniform fashion and make sure, as I alluded to earlier, that security is top of mind is absolutely paramount, right? And when we think about the Internet of Things, it's really taking all of these devices that you see examples, waste management, up at your top left, parking, lighting, transportation, green initiatives, and start to couple all those together. So connecting the things, looking at the various applications. If you think about the Internet of Things today as a consumer, you've got washing machines, you've got refrigerators, you've got Alexa turning lights on and off, you've got Nest thermometers, you've got all these devices. But what's the connectivity or the glue, if you will, in making all these work together right now? It's us, the human interface. So you've got all these applications on your phone, and you're having to really manage that. So what we're doing with a platform we call Kinetic is bringing that together. And the way I reference Kinetic, an easy way to maybe think about it is we cut our teeth on routing, so taking disparate systems, connecting them together and making sure data gets to the right spot. Well, Kinetic is essentially doing the same exact thing. It's a data broker that allows you to pull in data from disparate sensors, disparate sources, and then get that into whether it's tools you're already using, or to Jim's point earlier, create a visualization, if you will, of what's going on and bring that together. And then from a communication standpoint, I'll give you an interesting example. I think Cisco has typically been thought of, I'll tell you a little story here. I was talking to Jack Seuss, who's the CIO of the University of Maryland, Baltimore College, and we were talking about EDUCAUSE, and I said, so Jim, how many of your university problems do you think we can solve of the EDUCAUSE top 10? He said, maybe 3. And I said, now this is a customer who's bought a lot of Cisco stuff, a lot of our EAs, ELAs, and that type thing, but I asked him to characterize Cisco, and it was really a shot to the heart. He said, packet pusher. Jim, you have to appreciate that, speaking to customers all the time. And I said, so Jack, when you say packet pusher, let's talk a little bit about this platform you're looking at the time. It was before we changed Cisco Spark to WebEx Teams. He was looking at that platform, and I said, how would you characterize it? He said, well, it's your collaboration platform. And one of the problems that he said he was trying to solve for was space utilization in universities is at a premium. We can't continue to build $500, $600 million buildings when we're not using the space effectively that we have. And I said, well, what if I told you that WebEx Teams is a space utilization platform? And he said, so talk to me more. I said, well, we've got the ability to create a bot, look at your existing environment. You type in, I want to have a meeting in a certain building on a certain date at a certain time. And Spark WebEx Teams now gives you information back on the makeup of the room, the AV setup, how many chairs, how many desks, those type things. You just simply hit a numeral. I get an Outlook request automatically from WebEx Teams that I can then send to students, faculty, staff, or other people. So as you think about Cisco and you think about the context of all these things coming together, I thought Jim did a really good job of characterizing it really as a platform view. So when you're looking at the infrastructure piece, certainly think about it as a platform that you really can now develop business outcomes to. And WebEx Teams, our collaboration, is a platform which you can really develop to as well and really start to merge those. And then from a service perspective, these deployments really are very intense. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of consulting that you should consider, because it's not just an IT thing. It really starts to bubble up into an opportunity for the entire organization to look holistically at what you're doing, what you're bringing together, and then again, how to deliver those better citizen services, employee services, and the things that really matter to your constituents. All right, a couple of fun facts and benefits. So Gartner says that by 2020, there'll be around 20.5 billion devices connected. So just think about the magnitude of the number of connections. And by the way, those connections are all coming to a network near you. So this is not happening somewhere else, it's happening right here. And then PricewaterhouseCoopers says that they expect by 2020 about $832 billion of spend in this particular area. So if you go back to that 90% keeping the lights on and think about that 10% that's left over, there's a lot of opportunity here again to advance whatever your business happens to be. And that's a big shift. So having the opportunity and the spend to be able to take on that is very important. From an impact standpoint, when you pull all these devices together, ultimately, it's not the connectivity that matters. It's really the data that you start to derive. And you saw multiple examples earlier of how that data can start to yield, whether it's better health opportunities for people, farmers are better able to do what they're able to do, all those type things are available. The biggest shift, though, really is a different in business models. Right, so you think about, you heard earlier, disruption. Think about a little company called Uber and the ability to take the fact that people have a mobile application, and these guys drummed up the VC to get a data center together effectively. No cars, no transportation experience, and essentially they stood up a company that disrupted the entire transportation industry, and it's led to Lyft. It's led to courier delivery of food. You think about what Amazon's doing with Whole Foods, it's just amazing what's happening in this space. And from a benefit standpoint, it really is the ability to make faster decisions. So when you think about something I'll talk about on the next slide that's been top of mind for all of us, especially in education. When we talk about safer schools, safer campuses, the ability to react instantaneously to active shooters, situations where you have on-campus threats of any type, but not just react, right? It's the ability to react, integrate that with public safety officials, first responders, parents, and really pull together in a way that looks at things before they happen instead of how we react today, which is post that effect. So you start to think about, with location services, you know where people are. With cameras, you can actually see where people are in buildings. With facial recognition, you can tell whether it's a parent entering a room or a teacher, right? Heard recently from one of the CIOs at one of the K through 12s, he had 2 teachers resign recently because parents came to their room, unattended, not invited, no pre-warning, and threatened physical violence. And basically their feedback to the CIO, to the superintendent, was they simply cannot go forward in an environment where they feel like their safety is at risk. So you think about the opportunity really to provide a safer environment for not only students, but teachers, yourselves in a higher ed environment. It's very important. Harley-Davidson is another interesting example. So Harley-Davidson outfitted one of their entire factories with IoT, soup to nuts, and they were able to turn order to delivery cycles from 18 months down to about 2 weeks. They asset tagged all of their equipment in that facility so that they could maximize uptime. They streamlined pick and pack and all those type things that are associated with industry. So you think about that from a profitability perspective, they increased their profits by about 3%, increased production by 7%. Those are real type effects on businesses. And when you bring that into education, again, when you think about how we typically have worked with students around student success, it's been post them getting a bad grade, for example. And I know that's kind of holistically stereotyping, but the reality is we've been a lot more reactive. In a recent visit with Carnegie Mellon, I was speaking to David, they're the CIO, and he said, you know, Mark, I never thought about the network delivering data respective to where students may be, what they're participating in, and it's kind of Big Brother-like. But depending on how you use the data, how you look at that data and how it's assimilated, we could do some really creative things with it. He said, so for example, a student, Carnegie Mellon's a very difficult program. He said a student may be not doing very well in school, but instead of waiting toward the end, first grades, we can start to kind of see how things are moving. He said, so what if I could see students not doing well, they get in late every night to their dorm room, or they leave campus relatively late, or they're not there at all. And I could correlate that to the fact that they may have been in the library, they left the library late, they're getting back to that room. He said the way we may address that student is they're working hard, they could use a tutor, that type thing, versus the student where you have no visibility or you see they're out, and how you deal with that student, which may not be attending class, those type things. So to be able to pull all this data together in a really useful format is something that all of this is going to give us a lot of ability to do a better job with. And then cost reduction, naturally. To Jim's point earlier, if you think about administering an environment today, I've been with Cisco for coming up on 20 years. Worked with Cisco gear for a long time before that, got my CCIE back in 2002, and was very proud of the fact that it was very complex to configure this stuff, really complex to keep up a big environment, and a lot of job security and the fact that it would take me a lot of time to deploy these environments, right? So there's a lot of safety and security in that. But as things progressed, I found myself, even as a network technician, if you will, spending a lot more time troubleshooting, trying to figure out where things were broken, what was happening, when I could have spent my time more effectively out in the business, if you will, making sure that the different businesses, different line of businesses had what they needed from an IT perspective to deliver business value back to the business. And so that's some of the transitions we see that are happening as we start to automate a lot of this and give people time back from mundane tasks to invest more back into the business of the business, if you will. So there's power in the data. Jim mentioned a lot of these, so I'll just give a couple of examples. I shared Safer Schools. One with robotics is, again, I was meeting with a different K through 12 CO, and he said, Mark, you know, one of the things that was really cool, he said, I visit a lot of schools, and it's fascinating how underpowered their environments are to do what I consider some pretty remarkable things. And I said, so talk to me a little bit more. He said, well, we had a young lady who's got some serious health challenges. She can't attend class, but she didn't miss a class this year. He said, but what's really cool is that using our robot, we were able to walk her across the stage, participate in the graduation ceremony, all that type thing. And that came down to, again, that connectivity, coverages, combining all these technologies into one capability, if you will, and delivering something that student, I can assure you, will never forget, right? She continued to get her education. She walked across the stage, and being able to do that in that format is very, very cool. Fun fact I learned when researching this, some of the things that are being disrupted by this type technology, so I never would have thought of lifeguarding. I live in California. We swim on the beach. There's a lifeguard station every third of a mile. You've got young teenagers in a lot of cases that are lifeguarding. Fantastic, I feel very safe, but if one of their buddies comes by and they're talking and I'm out waving my arm, right, it could be a bad day for me. So in Australia recently, they have tested using drones and geospatial and recognizing what's going on the ground, the ability to recognize people in distress in the water, or recognize when there are, down in that neck of the woods, great sharks in the water. And they had 2 swimmers recently that got caught in a strong rip current, got taken out with that drone. They were able to fly over and drop a flotation device and get those folks out of the water in like 70 seconds. So you think about the power of this stuff, again, coming together. And by the way, those drone operators getting to be a big job, and that's starting to go into other areas of, as Jim brought up, whether you're talking about the battlefield, assessing the battlefield, assessing agriculture fields and telling where crops are, what stages they're in, how things are doing. So there's an immense amount of capability coming here. The one I want to focus on a little bit is connected communities. So transition a bit here is Cisco's really been involved heavily here, especially in public sector. It's part of the business that I cover, and community leaders started to come to us and say, look, it's challenging to continuously come up with budget to figure out how to revamp our IT infrastructure. We've got a lot of politics going on. There's people that want to bring things into the network, into the environment. There's no real strategy. And we're really starting to see this come into play here, but it's given us the ability to start looking at communities as a whole, not just as a local government, but how do you look at back to the Safer Schools? That's parents, that's the local mayor, it's public safety, it's all of the entities, it's the healthcare facilities, it's really everybody that makes up that community that would either proact or react to that type situation. And what we found is initially you saw a lot of smart deployments. So I show up here, lighting, parking, on environment, urban mobility that's responding to events like hurricanes, et cetera, safety and security, waste management. And a lot of these projects are going on in what I would consider kind of a vertical, if you will. So as most of the city leaders would tell you, there's smart deployments in a vertical, but there's really nothing smart about them as far as the way they're helping the local government, the city or the county, do a better job of serving the citizens. And so part of what's creating this problem is it is disparate, meaning that there's a lot of different players in the market. There's really not a strong single ecosystem, if you will, that helps pull all of this together. When it comes to horizontal, what I'll call providers like Cisco, where we're providing a lot of infrastructure, the things we've talked about, we've typically worked with our strategic partners who we've worked with for years around infrastructure and those type things. But as you start getting into parking and you start getting into things that matter around public works, that's not an area of expertise. So we're having to kind of, if you will, refigure out how to partner with partners, how to consult more at the city level, and start to have a different conversation there. There's no real standardization across sensors. I think the FCC recently, I believe it is, has just started mandating somewhat of a uniformed approach about the way manufacturing releases these sensors when it comes to security, so having some level of consistent security there. A lot of lack of cross domains. So when we talk about the politics, you guys are probably familiar with this regardless of the business you're in. When it comes to public works and public safety, even first responders, fire department, sheriff's department, police department, there's typically a real clear delineation between those organizations. Very difficult for them naturally to work across boundaries. And so working through that, a lot of work there. And then I talked about the ecosystem, it's very fragmented. So we're starting to see this pull together, but these are some of the challenges as you see IoT start to creep into your respective businesses that you will see. And when it comes to leaders, really, these are the three things. So managing changing expectations. This was mentioned earlier, everybody obviously expects mobile. There's no surprise there. If you can't mobilize it and have it on a mobile app, right, it's somewhat of a dead end, and especially as we start to move generationally from 57-year-olds to people who are much younger, they just naturally expect everything to have mobile access. And then access to services. I don't want to go stand at the DMV 6 hours to change plates from Tennessee to California. I want to be able to have at least some capability to do that via mobile app, get that set up, send in pictures, documentation, and then be able to walk in, get my tag, and do those type things. And anytime, anywhere, right? Again, as we get more and more mobile, the challenge for most city leaders is typically we've been somewhat brick and mortar bound. Education's somewhat the same degree, so anytime, anywhere access is really starting to evolve. The automation, the economic impact, Jim talked a lot about this, so I'll give one example of, he mentioned Barcelona, I'll use them again. Just with what they called what a vertical application of an IoT type market is parking. Two things, parking is only secondary to tax collections as far as revenue driver for most cities that do parking. The second thing is people trying to find a parking place is the #1 cause of air traffic pollution in any city. So when you look at things from a city perspective, a university campus perspective, where you've got people trying to find parking places, kind of remember those. But they saved or they made an incremental, I should say, just based on building a better parking solution, around $50 million a year in additional parking fees just from putting in an effective parking type solution. So it does have real economic impact. You're seeing downtown areas, up in Schenectady, New York, recently, where they're looking at a smart deployment using lighting, parking, a wireless wrapper, if you will, around the city to give businesses a reason to come into the city, drawing people back into the city, and we're really starting to see areas like that turn around. And it does impact jobs, to Jim's point. I think the thing you're going to see emerge out of this space, a lot of data scientists, data engineers, we're seeing a lot of organizations hire chief digital officers. So as this evolves, while you may see jobs disappear in one area, you're going to see a real ratcheting up, if you will, of career opportunities in others. The last one I'll call out just on the job front is cybersecurity. It's probably one of the biggest opportunities here, obviously, of impact, but it's also creating a massive market, which we're well short of about 3 million people right now, roughly, in cyber professional type jobs, so a big opportunity there. All right. I'll just show you a couple of things a little bit deeper. So our approach to smart cities is we obviously look at the connectivity layer there, and again, we are sensor agnostic, meaning if it can plug into an IP port or connect wirelessly, we can handle it, right? So from a connectivity standpoint, we're good to go there. Jim mentioned earlier the next phase of this, and it's how do you recognize what that thing is that's connecting, whether it's a person, a device, you name it. Our ability to identify that and make sure that it's carved out into its own safe zone, if you will, then we do that from the inception. So that makes sure, as I mentioned, with security being so paramount, if you start to open up your network, being able to build policy, get that device onboarded and put it into the right location so that it doesn't disrupt the rest of the network is very important. And then there are a multitude of technologies you can see down at the bottom, whether it's LoRaWAN, wired wireless, cellular, 5G is becoming obviously more and more of a hot topic. We handle all of these. And then Jim mentioned earlier cars collecting all this data. We also interoperate with DSRC modems. I think these have been put on board cars since about 2005, so the ability to start communicating vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, and back and forth is a real opportunity, okay? Now, the other key thing I point out is Cisco Kinetic for cities. This Kinetic platform, again, I mentioned earlier, is effectively our data ingestion engine. They can take data from any sensor and make sure that that data is, again, visualized through a local visualization tool that you build or have a partner build. But it can also output into other management platforms and those type things so that you can see that data in a way that it makes sense to you, in a way that you're used to seeing it. And then really last slide here is really to put a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak, is we really do have products that do this, so it's not just slideware. When you're talking about the street level or highway level, our industrial Ethernet products are typically what people use. Those are hardened platforms. You can deploy them on roadside, connected intersections, those type areas. And the beauty of what we're doing with our platform, not only on the industrial Ethernet side, but also now in the campus, is including an x86 chipset in that and the ability to run containers on that platform. So as Jim talked about earlier, he kind of made a glancing blow around fog computing or edge computing. The ability for these devices, for example, to be deployed and be your edge compute platform is real today, and I'll give you an example. So in Tennessee, State Department of Transportation was looking at about 41 different sensors, and what they were trying to figure out is what use case would make the most sense and help the state. So one of the big problems in Tennessee is fog, especially from where Seth is from. I see you left the room, but fog in East Tennessee around the mountainous area is a big problem. A lot of car crashes, and the commissioner is obviously always interested in safety first, right? If they can save one life, it's a big deal. So what they were able to do is take, again, NOAA weather data. They were able to take traffic data from those local areas and start to look at that in unison. And they basically, the developers within the Department of Transportation wrote an application and deployed it on the industrial Ethernet routers where they could actually close gate off-ramps off of the interstate automatically rather than having to send an officer out there. Those type things late at night. It was the ability to, again, automate this function. Now, that's not necessarily latency sensitive and those type things, but as you start getting into where edge computing really comes into play, if now you're driving a vehicle and you're in Montana doing 80 to 100, I notice people like to go really fast here, and an accident is a mile up the road, well, you all know with simple math, you get up on that accident very quickly. So The ability for the infrastructure to communicate back to you, the driver, whether it's through Waze or the state's doing some type of a deployment of an application that helps you from a safety perspective, to let you know that there's an accident in the right lane, move left, slow down, all those type things, or light signage. Those are the type things where edge computing becomes a reality. Jim mentioned Monsanto earlier. I think what he told us on the way over is when you have to slow down a tractor in planting, that's big business, right, when you talk to an agriculture organization. When you're in a manufacturing facility and you slow down production, it's millions of dollars. If you react slowly in an emergency management type situation, you cost lives. One more example we heard recently is a port, when they're sailing these ships in, they're investigating or testing, I should say, autonomous ships. If a ship hits anything going into or out of a dock, it's a $300 million fine. So you think about the magnitude of these financial hits that companies take. The ability for this technology to deter that type thing is a real deal. So we'll go from the street level, our industrial Ethernet products, as you go up into the traditional network core. Our platform there, call it digital network architecture. The technology that we've really been seeing take off in a big way is our software-defined access, and that's really three key things as you're looking at a security-first approach. Again, being able to, through policy, make sure things end up in the right place so that don't disrupt the rest of the network. Moving from human-defined to software-defined. So when you think about what drives most IT issues, there's a lot of configuration errors, human errors, so being able to take that out of the equation. And then I say it's always listening, always learning. So when you think about the machine learning AI aspect of that architecture and being able to make sure that it sees things long before a human typically would and either alerts you or helps solve that problem, those are the type things we're moving into. And of course, from a security standpoint, everybody's familiar with our security architecture, and then you see Kinetic, Jasper, and those type things sitting at the top left. So what we're doing for smart cities is really, again, providing the infrastructure, providing it in a secure fashion, giving you the ability through an open platform to be able to develop what you need to be relevant for your particular constituents. And then just to let you see that the market, it's not just us talking about ourselves, but Navigant did recognize us as a number one supplier for smart cities. Award-winning platform in 2017 and 2018. And then for additional reading, research, those type things, we get real good props on our blog. So you can go to Cisco Government Blogs and you can actually read a lot more in detail about these things out there. And with that said, we'll wrap it up.
All right, thank you, Marcus.